valore che poteva.
Good morning to all those viewing from Chennai, and a warm hello to those viewing from other parts of the world, from other time zones. And we welcome you all to the second day of our lecture series, Literature in Times Like These. At the outset, I would like to acknowledge the support and encouragement of the principal in charge, Dr. Vadalakshmi, who we at the Department of English see as our kindred spirit because she is professionally a professor of French and she has visited our department many times, and we've had tete-a-tetes on literature and our love for literature. So I wholeheartedly thank Madam Vadalakshmi for her encouragement. I also thank my colleagues at the Department of English for their support and help at this time. I welcome all the participants. It's good to see you today, and we're already feeling like one community, isn't it? So it's nice to think that we are all a community of people deliberating together on the challenge of our times, not from a scientific perspective of whether a vaccine can be found, that's beyond our scope, but from the perspective of humanities, or rather a humanistic perspective. Um, and as we can see, our list of registrations show that we have registrations cutting across disciplines in the humanities. And we also have people whose interest has no academic label to support, and we're so happy to welcome them in our midst today. So, like yesterday, I would like to give you a little snippet about Queen Mary's College and the history of this great institution. So here, I was thinking yesterday that we actually didn't plan to have this lecture series in connection with the anniversary of Queen Mary's College, which falls on the 14th of July. But it is a happy coincidence that we are having this lecture on the 4th of July, just 10 days before the 14th of July. So I just like to share with you something that our founder principal, Ms. Dila Hay, wrote. She wrote, "There is no doubt that this college is destined to have an influence on the future of Indian womanhood in this presidency. How anxiously and yet how hopefully I wait to see the assurance that the influence will be for good." She also wrote, "Here we are, a large community of people drawn from various castes and creeds, speaking various tongues. Let each member of the community preserve her own individuality and draw from her games and from her studies and from her intercourse with her companions the widening comprehension of the meaning and value of life and a deepening resolution to make her life one of usefulness, of service, and of help." We would agree that Ms. Delahay's vision has found fulfillment not only in the 106 years of the life of the college, but even today, as our endeavor, Literature in Times Like These, strikes a chord with participants at this webinar, and we believe that it will have a ripple effect in society. And I'd like to allude to yesterday's lecture by Dr. Rufus. And though existentialism is perceived as nihilistic, negative, his address yesterday was so life affirming, and it left all of us probably with this conclusion. We didn't articulate it like this perhaps, but what we can say at the end of it is literature helps us find meaning in life, even though we are not able to find answers to the questions that we ask. So coming to the deliberations for today, we have with us Dr. Jinnah, and he has aptly titled his address on the subject of disease and death as Canker, Plague, and Phage. Disease, as we know, is an uncomfortable subject. And we are getting so many messages on WhatsApp about how our response to COVID-19 should be. Some text advice, do not talk about COVID. It's depressing, it makes it worse. One text brought out the sage wisdom of an 87-year-old man who responded to the idea of the new normal with his experience of having lived through polio, diphtheria, and Vietnam. He said, I learned long ago not to see the world through the printed headline. I see the world through the people around me. I see the world with the realization that we love big. Therefore, I choose to write my own headlines. So, saying he listed many positive statements about human relationships. Well, the 87-year-old man's response could be seen by some as facile optimism. So, whether we pep ourselves up the way he did, or have empathy for the sick, or grieve with those who are bereaved in this pandemic, or keep a safe distance from sources of infection, we are navigating something called disease. And I wholeheartedly thank Dr. Jinnah for choosing to address this subject with his expertise. So, a brief introduction to our resource person. Dr. Abdul Mohamed Ali Jinnah is an associate professor at Jamal Mohamed College, which is affiliated to Bharati Dasan University. He has 20 years of teaching and 12 years of research experience. He is an alumnus of Pondicherry Central University and a gold medalist of the class of 1998. Um, he has international affiliations as well because he is a visiting professor at University of Indonesia and the State University of Semarang. He has given special lectures in more than 100 national and international conferences in different parts of India and abroad, including Sri Lanka, Thailand, Malaysia, Bhutan, and Indonesia. He is a member of the Gothic Association of New Zealand and Australia and a reviewer for Common Ground Research Network, University of Illinois Research Park. And here's another heartwarming thing about him. He's a creative writer and has published flash fiction and horror narratives, which are available, of course, on Amazon. He offers creative writing courses and is an academic consultant on writing Gothic fiction, a program by the University of Surakarta, Central Java. So his inclination in research is towards pop culture, dread narratives, and post-human discourses. He also specializes in literary theory and the digital humanities. We couldn't have got a better resource person for today. And so we welcome you, Dr. Jinnah, to this session. And we are extremely grateful to you for consenting to speak at this lecture series. So before I hand over to Dr. Jinnah, I would like to make an announcement. Certificates will be issued only to those who submit all 4 feedback forms for all 4 days. And the certificates will be sent to you on or before the 15th of July. So, and then in the chat box, please do fill in your name and designation, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Zoom. So with this, I hand over to you, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
So it's a great opportunity for me to be part of this webinar. And maybe I can use this term to become a part of Queen Mary's College also. Solution. I've always looked at this institution even when I was a student. I studied in Pondicherry University, so every weekend I used to visit Chennai and come to the various libraries in Chennai. And I would always stand outside the portals of Queen Mary's College and look at that institution and think, maybe one day I would be invited to this institution. And so here I am. maybe not physically, of course, but just think about it. No, we talk about times like these, and the times like these might have brought out a lot of depression in many of us. But there are a lot of positives also, and one of those positives which I would like to see it, if not physical, at least my mental attendance over there to Queen Mary's College. So I take this as a wonderful opportunity to be a part of your great institution and to speak to, I guess, around 2,300 participants. Now that's a great thing. So can we have the slides on, please? So this is what we are going to discuss today. First slide. Yeah. So I'm sure we are aware of the title. We are talking about these times, literature of these times. Now, what exactly are we talking about? Why do we use that term, these times? Now, when I was invited to be part of this discussion and when I was given this title, I was just reminded of one particular question that was a very important question, a very pertinent question that was asked by the great German romanticist, Holderlin. Uh, Today it is associated as a part of one of the greatest questions of humanity. Holderlin was a poet, and he wrote a very important poem called The Blue Danube, for which he was thrashed left, right, and center. So he just refused to write anymore. He said, I'm not going to write anymore. And when he was asked, he replied with a question for the audience, for the viewers, for the readers. He asked the question, why should I write in times like these? You understand the connection which I got? He's asking the question, why should I write in times like these? Now, this was in the 18th century. And when he asked the question, why should I write in times like these? He was asking a question very pertinent to humanity. He was saying that these are times when there is no introspection. These are times when there is no contemplation of anything associated with society. So my poems, my entire oeuvre of poetry is getting thrashed because people do not introspect. People do not want to think about what I'm writing. You understand that question? Why are we talking about times like these? Come on, what is wrong with these times? The fact that we are facing an epidemic? The fact that our normal life has been thrown out of, the dimensions which we are used to? The fact that we are not able to travel? The fact that we are not able to go to a restaurant and eat our favorite food? What exactly is the question of these times? I think all that aspects of depression or the feeling of loneliness or alienation, all these come out of the central fact that we think that humanity is undergoing a very painful process, that we are being affected. We in the sense of we, the Homo sapiens, we are being affected. Now from that I move on to another very important discussion, and that is called the Galapagos syndrome. Yesterday, Dr. Rufus was talking about the theory of evolution. We talked about Charles Darwin. Now, many of Charles Darwin's hypotheses were based on the experiments which he conducted on this island in South America near Ecuador that is called the Galapagos Island. All of us are aware of that. Now, the Galapagos is a series of islands which today, per se, exist in an ideal condition that is called homeostasis. Homeostasis in the sense that, we let things live, survive as they are. If you go to Galapagos as a tourist today, you would be asked not to interfere with the fabric, with the rubric of that island. You're not supposed to go near the giant tortoises. You're not supposed to go near the iguanas. You're not supposed to even pick up any of those, innumerable scattered apples which you would find on that island. Now, why did this come into being? It's very simple. When Charles Darwin entered into Galapagos, we call that invasion. So when he entered into Galapagos, he brought a section of humanity along with him. So there were many ships which moved towards the direction of Galapagos. And in these ships, we had humans. They stepped over onto the island of Galapagos, and with them, they brought a lot of their own, animals. For example, they brought a lot of goats to eat when they are, settled over there. Obviously, if there are ships, rats and cats come along with them. And the islands were invaded by all this. And you know what happened? Within 20 years, the local animal population was almost completely decimated. So the government had to take a kind of a step, and they said, fine, what we are going to do is that we are not going to allow this to happen. We are going to return back to the original position, and all the invasive species, they were completely wiped out. They were killed. Now comes the eternal question, should this have been done or not? Because according to the law of natural process, we talk about the survival of the fittest, right? And so in the animals of Galapagos were not fit to survive. So the invasive species had to take over. But no, we didn't stop it at that, right? We had to think about going back to an original state of stasis. So therefore, all these invasive species had to be wiped out. So it's a classic catch-22 situation. The Galapagos syndrome basically focuses on that. Sometimes for the survival of one particular species, the extension of other species becomes a must. Do you understand that fact? It's a very scientific fact, but it's a very worthy fact in times like these. Now, this has to be referred to in literary terms. Also, there are at least two important writers who have given us this whole idea of the Galapagos syndrome. One, of course, is the science fiction writer, Kurt Vonnegut, who has written a very interesting apocalyptic novel called Galapagos. The name of the novel alludes to the islands. And it talks about a kind of a reverse evolution, because Charles Darwin told us about evolution from the point of view of Galapagos. Here, Kurt Vonnegut gives us the idea of a reverse evolution, in the sense man returning, or humans returning back to the original state from which they started off. So from Galapagos, we have moved over to the other landscapes. He talks about the return back to Galapagos in that sense, the reverse sense. And Joyce Carol Oates, she talks about the whole idea of the Galapagos syndrome in a short story. It's a horror fiction that is called Equatorial, where she mentions this whole idea of the catch-20. Should the original inhabitants be left homeostasis, or should we allow the invasion of the island by these new species? Now, I want you to ponder over this situation, because there is a point I'm trying to make. Can we move on to the next slide? I have titled this discussion in 3 parts. The first part is called Canker. Canker as in sense of, an ulcerous growth. Canker in the sense of a cankerous nature, a bad disposition, a bad temperament. Sometimes we call people cankersome. Ebenezer Scrooge was a cankerous old man. Dr. Jekyll transforms into Mr. Hyde, a cankersome giant. Now, I would just like you to relate to the questions which I asked earlier. In times like these, when we ask a question like, what is necessary in times like these, are we only focusing on us? In the sense, are we only talking about ourselves? Are we trying to point out that the whole world revolves only around us, the Homo sapien, the human? Quite rightfully, we call it the age of the Anthropocene. Everything is channelized only towards us. We're kind of very selfish that way, right? So I would like to look into this question from this point of view. Okay, we are facing a pandemic. And okay, you know what, we are so much affected by it. There's so much of loss of life around us. But can we see this as a part of the Frankensteinian monster, in the sense, are we the Frankenstein who have created this whole bloody monster? One of my favorite characters in postmodern fiction is a person named Ali King. He comes in The Mosquito Coast by Paul Theroux. Please to read that novel. It's a novel in which Ali takes himself away from the center of society. He goes and starts living in the Amazonian forest. Of course, he does not do that alone. He takes his wife and family along with him. And the family says, why have you done this? Why have you taken us away from civilization? He says, it is necessary. We have to be away from society because society or humanity, I quote, he says, is the biggest plague of all. Now, that's a very dangerous accusation. I believe many of us would not agree with that. But please, hey, come on, look at it. What have we done to the world? What have we done to all those things around us? In our haste to be the central, in our haste to position ourselves as the centrality of everything, haven't we just dismissed, destroyed everything? Everything. So is there a possibility? Today, I think we need to ponder over that. Is there a possibility when the plague is staring right at us, is there a possibility that we should be looking at it not in terms of depression, not in terms of torment, but in terms of introspection, in the sense, are we the cause of all this? I know we are so much affected by death around us, but death is biological. I'm not looking at it philosophically. Death is a natural process. And one of the great thinkers of our times, great thinkers of these times, Yuval Noah Harari, he says that we have given up the whole process of dying. We don't want to die. So how does the world balance itself? Look at the number of births recorded and look at the number of deaths recorded every second. There should be a balance. Unfortunately, all this progress in medical science has actually disrupted that balance. He says we just don't die. We just don't want to die. I know that's a very harsh statement that he's making, but why don't we think about it? And then, of course, we have this great, some people call him an atheist, others would call him a pragmatist, Richard Dawkins. From the idea of the theory of evolution to the idea of the survival of the fittest, Dawkins says that there is one reason why we have basically flourished. The survival of the fittest. He equates that with a kind of a special gene which have inherited. And he calls that the selfish gene. What he means by the selfish gene is that we just don't want to leave the world. It's a very pragmatic statement. Please do not take it any way other than that. But look what the will to survive has led us to. It has made us very cankerous. We whine and complain about everything, and we garb it in the whole, term of philosophy. Basically, we are just, juvenile complainants. You understand the point of the logic of all these statements? Are we looking at the idea of a plague in a very cankersome way? Simply put, are we like kids who refuse to go to school? All those tantrums that we used to throw, or today, the kids of today are throwing. No, that is the centrality of the question over here. There was a very refreshing book which came out in the year 2018, I guess. It was by an American Indian doctor, Atul Gawande. It's called Being Mortal. Now, Atul Gawande is a doctor who has worked in a lot of hospices in and around America, US. And he finds that, there are a lot of, the majority of the population in these hospices are elderly people. In the sense they have been, thrown away from their families. Their kids do not have the time to take care of them. So they are brought to all these costly, expensive hospices, sanatoriums, and they are, given a room out there. And they spend their lifetime watching TV till they die. Now he asks a very important question out there. He says, is life something that has to be prolonged, or is life something that has to be lived? So he kind of differentiates between living a life and, prolonging a life. This was a question that was asked in one of Anita Desai's short stories also. I'm sure many of you must have read that short story. It's called The Devoted Son, where there is this old man, the father, and you have his son, a doctor. He's a very, big shot doctor, and he wants his father to live a full life. Now, the definition of a full life might change from people to people. The father's idea of a full life is to eat well, is to, chat with his friends, is to be happy. Whereas the son, the doctor's idea of a full life is to, give him medicines, stop him eating all those oily food, and, generally keep him on a diet so that he lives a long life. Now, Atul Gawande is asking you this kind of a question. And he asks another central question: is this life necessary? You understand that? I want you to understand that basic premise of that question. Should we be depressed in times like these because it's a scientific, it's a natural order of things. And look what it has made us so canker somewhere. I mean, everyone is angry today. I'm sure you can relate this to the world. Look around us. Everyone is angry. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of microaggressions which are happening all over the world, online, offline, on the street, on the roads, in households, on the media. There are discussions of aggressions. I'm sure you can relate a lot of social issues to what I'm saying right now. I don't want to give particular examples because there are innumerable number of examples. We have reached the age of adiaphorization. Now, this is a terminology which I'm using from Zygmunt Bauman, another very important social theorist. He says the age of the Anthropocene has led to the age of adiaphorization because we simply do not care. We talk about humanity, the idea of the humane, right? He says that doesn't exist anymore unless and until it affects us directly. We become humane, we become sympathetic only when we find that these things affect us directly. Otherwise, we just watch an entire flock of people being killed, massacred, and we don't even lift a finger. You understand how cankersome we have become? So is this part of our canker? Is a question I think we should relate to ourselves very, very directly. Can I have the next slide, please? So the idea of the plague, which we are so cankersome about, which we are so afraid of, the idea of the epidemic. Every day it's increasing. Right? Every day it arrives at our doorstep nearer and nearer. Trichy yesterday had the highest recorded cases, I believe. So did Tamil Nadu. And every day it's a record of sorts. It's a disease, it's an epidemic that is spreading to our households, right? But let me tell you, it is just nature's way of culling us. I mean, we try to stop nature from coming at us at every possible direction, but as Ian Malcolm says, in Jurassic Park, if you remember the original movie, the mathematician, the chaos theory expert, Ian Malcolm, he would come up with a very interesting statement. He would say, nature finds a way. Now here, I'm just paraphrasing this idea that he puts forward in these times, in the sense of nature always finds a way. Some kind of a culling is always necessary, according to natural sciences. So here, what we are having is basically a look at how nature finds a way. I know it kind of shocks us, but this has been a part of nature. I'm sure many of us would have read back to all those, epidemics which have spread through mankind, through the world in the past years. And today we have a better understanding of the idea of a plague, the idea of an epidemic, because we are living it. Earlier, it was just something that happened in textbooks. It was something that happened only in books or, in Wikipedia. But today we are living it. So we kind of, we can understand it on a first-hand basis. So what exactly is the nature of an epidemic? I'm not looking at the medical factors. Let's not delve into that. But let's look at our factors, the psychological factors. For example, the epidemic gives us a fear. We are living in a constant state of fear, one way or the other. The mind reacts in funny ways, they say. And you must have, of course, heard of all those anti-epidemic activists who say that, all this is just a conspiracy theory. The facts are right there in front of their faces, but they are not willing to accept it at all. That's a kind of a dread narrative. The world is so accustomed to today. They refuse to wear their masks. It says social distancing is for liberal weaklings. As I said, the facts are out there, but they are not ready to listen to the facts. They are not ready to see the facts. So fear this way or that way, there is an element of fear. Before all this, let me give you a very personal anecdote. Before all this, this social distancing started, before we went into quarantine, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, they had come from Bangalore to visit us here in Trichy. In 2 days, we went into containment, and the secretary of the apartment where we currently reside, he called us for an emergency meeting, and he said, "Who are they?" "These are the people. They are relatives." "Where are they from?" "From Bangalore." "Oh, they have come from Bangalore. Maybe you should think of a kind of a self-quarantine." In any other normal circumstance, their coming here would not have been a factor at all. But just look at the fear syndrome that has grown into us. We have heard of societies keeping people away, banishing them. It's not just happening on a micro level, it's also happening on a macro level. I'm sure you can relate to that very easily. Then, of course, there is this whole idea of the naming that is so fantastic. I'm sure you must have had so many forwards that tell you that this is a part of a natural process that occurs every century or so. So if this is 1920 and we are facing COVID-19, novel COVID-19, coronavirus, President Trump has even called it Kung flu. In 1918, I'm sorry, this is 2020. In 1918, we had the Spanish flu. You must have heard of that, right? Very interesting idea. Why was it named the Spanish flu? Was it because a lot of people died in Spain? Was the maximum number of casualties in Spain? No. Okay, fine. Did it originate in Spain? No, it originated in France. The maximum casualties were in India. We lost 17 million people. We called it the Bombay fever because it came to us through Bombay. But the whole world looked at it as a Spanish flu. Even today, they call it the Spanish flu. Why? Because one particular individual was infected by it, and that was the then king of Spain. He didn't even die. He was just infected by it, and it became the Spanish. The idea of naming, naming is a very powerful construct. It's a discourse. Look at the way we name our cyclones and typhoons. Right? Look at the names. Every country is given a chance to name, and they give some name which is very, very, you can actually deconstruct those names. And today, look what is happening. It's a Chinese thing. And things have accelerated and gone to such a stage that there is a standoff between China and the entire world. I'm not going into the right and wrong of this. It's for us to ponder over. But I'm just telling you how these names are being given. And how these names we associate with a lot of references that might sometimes be very prejudiced. That might sometimes be very, very biased. And of course, it has led to a classic standoff today We are talking about we versus them. Look at what happened in India in the initial, frenzy that accompanied the fact that we were in the process of entering into a full-blown epidemic. We indulged in a lot of we versus them. A particular section of the community was called the killer community. The virus was associated with them. And today we have streets, which are kind of having barriers which the individual citizens, they put it up, not the government, not the system. It's the individuals, they have literally, closed down streets and saying that only people from our street should be allowed inside, others should not come. We have to understand one fact that the pandemic takes over larger than life dimensions in the sense that in our frenzy not to die or not to be infected, we just do not care about the others. Look at all those frontline fighters in this corona war, the doctors, the nurses. They have not been allowed inside their own homes. Their bodies have not been allowed to be properly given their due respect. Times like these, right? Calls for an introspection, right? What are we worried about? What are we scared about? And how do we express that fear in the form of a frenzy? It's almost a collective frenzy. It's a mob frenzy. There are communal mobs, there are gendered mobs, and there are infected mobs. I hope you understand the idea of an infected mob. They are infected by their fear, not by the disease. Then, of course, we have these, the so-called collateral damages of the infection. People just die, not just out of the disease, not just because of their infections. They die because they feel that their time is up. Look at all those associated suicides. Again, we have, in our public consciousness, we have come across so many related suicides that make us wonder, hey, why did this fellow commit suicide right now, at this time? This whole dome syndrome. You understand the idea of the dome? We put ourselves into a shell of our own making, a shell that kind of inhibits or keeps away a certain section of the people. Because we think that they are the carriers. Believe me, this is not something that, we are only we, the present generation is so much to be castigated for. No. This has been part of the process of an epidemic. I mean, look at our ancient masters. For example, Sophocles. He looked at the plague or the scourge as something coming from God. Oedipus Rex. The plague is always in the reckoning. It's a kind of a moral process, this equation. It's kind of a punishment. Right? So Homer, Sophocles, the Bible, the Quran, they all look upon this pestilence as a punishment from a higher authority, God. It's as if the righteous would be saved and the evil, the sinners, they would be punished. How? As an act of God. I can quote umpteen number of examples from numerous literature which focuses on this particular idea. So can we say that the pandemic, every pandemic has taught us something? I'm sure the whole idea of a pandemic is social distancing today, right? Everyone talks about it. They say that, if you keep 6 feet away, then they said 10 feet away, then 11 feet, now 12 feet. Keep yourself away. Or cover yourselves. The whole idea of coverage, covering, has always been a central part of, the war against the epidemic. You remember those plague masks? And we have designer masks today, right? I think the youngsters of today probably might be having some 10 or 15 different masks, different colors, because it has become a fashion statement. But do you know that the kind of masks, the simplest of all masks that we use today, actually originated during the time of the Spanish flu? Before that, the mask was simply a cloth that you put around your face. That's all. But this mask, the medical mask that we use today, it kind of grew only during the 1980s, the Spanish flu. First, the doctors were instructed to wear them, and then it was, given over to the people. Uh, but the fun fact, I shouldn't be using this word because sometimes humanity is funny. The fun fact is that, they wore these masks to tatters. They should be washed, right? If it is that kind of a mask, they should be washed. They never bothered to wash it. So, the whole mask was teeming with organisms. So ultimately what happened was the mask itself became one of the carriers of the virus. So every epidemic kind of adds on to knowledge about that. But do we actually use that knowledge to help ourselves, to realize ourselves? Is a very important question for which I do not have a very definite answer. But maybe, as I said, we should ponder over it. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so the literature of these times. I know I've been talking a lot about the sociological implications of the pandemic, but how has it been presented in literature? Because basically, that's what we are, right? We are literature students. Sorry. Now there are umpteen number again. I think it has seeped into our consciousness so much that I'm sure all of you would have researched, blogged, Googled out, and you would have found out hundreds of books in relation to the pandemic. I'm just going to point out a few of them, and maybe you can debate with me as to whether they actually belong to the, the literature of the pandemic. You're free to question me, but I just want you to have a look at those things, because these are documents basically which foreground not the disease per se, but it foregrounds more the human frailty, the human stupidity, the canker of humanity. They are very political statements which these writers have actually made. I think one of the best among them is Edgar Allan Poe's classic short story called The Mask of Red. If you have not read it, please read it. It's a primal example of dread narrative. It shows us how unequal humanity can be, because there is a group of aristocrats during the time of the Black Death, they simply hide themselves in their castles. There is no food for the poor. So, not just they are dying from the disease, they are also dying from starvation. There's absolutely no food. But their sculleries, the aristocrats, I mean, they are filled with food, and every day is a party. And on one particular party, which is being held with all fun and frolic, there is an intruder. It's a mask, okay? So you wear masks to that party, so nobody knows who you are exactly. So there you have an intruder, and that intruder happens to be the Grim Reaper or the Plague in personification. He comes as Red Death. You know, he's wearing a red mask. And his intrusion is very significant because the second he intrudes, everyone is infected. So they say death is a great leveler, right? It doesn't bother about kings and beggars, they say, right? This short story, it's a short story, it's a masterful allusion to that fact that death can strike you anytime, anywhere. Who are you? Now, as I said, it's a very political statement because Poe is looking at the haves and the have-nots vis-a-vis the ideology of a pandemic, of a plague, of the Black. I do not know how many of you would agree with the inclusion of Stephen King out here, because I know we always have this idea that this is the canon of literature and this is the segregated bestseller. And many people do not accept Stephen King as a literary writer. That's so sad, because he is capable of writing great literature. Unfortunately, critics like Harold Bloom have always relegated him to the bestseller stream. But if you want to get a clear-cut idea of an artificial plague, of an artificial catastrophe, please read this time. The virus there is very funnily named Captain Trips because it trips you up, basically. And you die. And in the first, it's a huge tome. It runs to around 1,200 pages or so. And in the first few hundred pages, Stephen King tries to establish the nature of an epidemic, how people die, how it spreads. He has a very beautiful domino effect that he creates in that novel, how it spreads from individual to individual, and how in a matter of minutes, the entire nation, in fact, the entire world is decimated. And then there are the moral implications also. What happens in a post-apocalyptic world order? Once the plague has run its course, what happens in that, in the survivor's order? So there is obviously the stand that the good people take against the bad. And the bad here, instead of the Red Death, we have a black man, a black in the sense dressed in black. Please not misunderstand. He's always dressed in black. He's a man in black. And he is the devil persona. So he leads the fight for evil. And we have here an old woman, an old African American woman who leads the fight for the good. So it becomes a kind of a moral stand which Stephen King takes. Now, please understand, I'm talking about the construction of a pandemic. I think that is very significant in these times because we always have these conspiracy theories going around that was this, I'm talking about COVID, was this a pandemic that came naturally, or is it a pandemic that has been created in a scientific lab? A lot of apocalyptic novels which deal with the creation of the virus, the creation of the pandemic. The Stand is one such. And then, of course, there is this masterpiece of dread literature, that is Jose Saramago's Blindness. Now, here the nature of the pandemic is very different. It's not about death, it's about blindness. It's very scary because one day, suddenly, people start losing their vision. They become blind. There's no reason for it. They just become blind. There's this guy driving, he's able to see the road, and suddenly everything goes into darkness. And all these people, they are segregated in a particular place. We talk about containment zones today, right? So there is this huge building that becomes a containment zone for these people. They are all herded into them. It's a kind of an imprisonment. Literally, they are put in jail. And there are people sent to take care of them. Remember, they are blind. And then one day, even the caretakers simply do not come. They stop. What happens to them? How is life then? It's a very scary look at blindness. That is the power of his writing. He shows you fear through his words. Now, of course, this again is a very political statement. See, these novels, I wanted to tell you about these novels because these are novels that make political statements. Now, Jose Saramago is looking at the idea of an authoritarian regime. The symbol of blindness is just that, it's a symbol. Maybe it's an indictment to you and me. Maybe it's just trying to tell us that we have become blind. You understand the symbolic blindness that Jose Saramago is alluding to? If you want to read a book about life during Annus Horribilis, I'm sure all of you get that reference. The Great Fire, the Black Death, during those times, if you want to get a real life understanding of how the plague affected a community of people in rural England, I think you should read this book. It's a book called The Year of Wonder. It's by Geraldine Brooks. And she talks about how the pandemic spreads in a village. It's a beautiful, beautiful description of not death, because death is given in a very matter of fact way. It's a destruction of what we would call the moral fact. I know we always talk about, these small villages having this kind of a very the networking, which is very elaborate. But here we see the unraveling of that networking, the break, and how it affects ordinary people. If you want to go into a very philosophical discussion of a post-apocalyptic scenario where the entire world is probably life as we know it has ended, then you definitely have to read Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Very few characters. Basically, we have this unnamed father and son. The mother's dead, and they go on a journey. They just keep walking. And then one day the father dies. But just before his death, he sees to it that his son has some kind of a finality, some kind of a closure. He's able to provide that to his son. But it's a beautiful description of, I think it's a classic study of alienation and the fear that it invokes, the fear of alienation that is invoked during these times. Okay, fine. I'm also trying to look at it in very different ways also. For example, the plague or the epidemic, we talk about the creation of fear. that comes into us, right? I think before the COVID-19 situation that we are facing, some of us would be able to relate to the 1980s when we had this huge fear of AIDS. So I think AIDS was a modern day equivalent of the plague. I think at least people of my generation would be able to relate to that because that fear was spreading at that time. Now I think AIDS is just a matter of fact. There's this huge fear, you know. I call it the modern day plague because people looked at the plague, I'm sorry, the AIDS exactly as they looked at the plague, or you know, this in the 16th century there was this huge pandemic of syphilis. So people looked at it in that way. You know, that perspective was very moralistic. They were telling us that, you know, HIV is the scourge of God. It's against these immoral people. That is the most politically incorrect statement that was made in the 1980s, I believe, because it was considered to be, you know, only against the immoral people. I hope you understand what I mean by immoral. You know, those people who are, you know, sexually different, or those people who are drug addicts, or those people who, I don't know, have affairs, something like that. You know, those who do not follow marital fidelity. No, it was a huge scare at that time, and there was a particular vision in which these HIV positive people were trying to take revenge on all those people who are HIV free. There was this huge fiasco, I should say, of a HIV infected person who just, you know, had this blood in a bottle and he started throwing it around because he wanted everyone to be infected with the virus. And that was a serious scare, you know. That was a serious scare. I believe in NBA, the National Basketball Academy of US. HIV infected people were banned from playing because, you know, that was a scare. Okay, why I'm telling you all this? Because I want to allude to this one particular powerful novel that's called Confessions. It's written by Kene Minato. I'm sorry, there is a spelling mistake over there. It's Kanae. So Kene Minato writes this novel. It's called Confessions. It's about a mother. She's a school teacher. She's a very passive kind of an individual. And then one day her daughter is raped and killed. It's a shocking description. The Japanese can be very powerful, you know, in their depiction of graphic violence. This is one such novel. So what does the mother do? She doesn't go to the police. She knows the killers. She doesn't go to the police. She doesn't believe in the legal system. She believes in, you know, that old age thing. Murder has to be avenged. So she wants to kill those fellows. And what she does is basically use the idea of the pandemic, that was the HIV at those times, and she is able to procure a vial of HIV infected blood, and she injects this blood into the milk cartons, which would later be drunk by these two boys. Boys, in the sense, they are school children. They are not teenagers, or they are not big fellows. School children. They want to experiment with murder. It's a crazy novel. But you understand, she tries to use the HIV, the pandemic, as a form of vengeance. But that was very interesting because she gives them that milk and she sits back. I mean, they attend the same school that she works, right? And she observes those kids and she thinks of, you know, the way their bodies would deteriorate. For her, the HIV, the pandemic is a simplistic matter of fact instrument to take a life. So this would be one of those offbeats commentaries on the pandemic where you have the whole, it's ginormous, right? The dimension is ginormous, but she takes it in a very narrow and padded and, individualistic level, and she tries to use that. It was a fascinating. Now, the next part might not be exactly a pandemic. Most of you would disagree with me because there is a definition for the pandemic. It has to spread internationally. It has to cut across, nationalities and geographical spaces. But I just want you to have an understanding of a man-made calamity. I believe the biggest man-made calamity ever, in some sense, and that is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was destruction on a mass level. Even nature is probably could not equate with that kind of a destruction. And we have one particular statement. It's a testimonial. It's a memoir, basically. It's called Hiroshima no Pika. It's written by a fellow, a boy, basically a boy, on whom the bomb was dropped. I mean, he was there in Hiroshima when the bomb fell. I think he was 6-year-old at that time. He survived in some way. I mean, how do you even call that a survival? It's a very important question. But he survived in some way, and he reflects on this full-blown, massive destruction that happened within seconds. I know it's not exactly a pandemic, but since we are talking about the literature of these times, vis-a-vis the ideology of humankind and humanity, I think this is one book that has to be a part of the discussion, and I have put it out there for you just to think about it. Can I have the next slide, please? Shakespeare is one writer who can be revisited in so many different ways. We have been applying a lot of theories unto Shakespeare. And with the eruption of COVID-19, there is a new dimension of Shakespeare that is coming up now. Shakespeare during the times of plague, I'm sure all of you know about it, but I just wanted to, put it out there, as I said again. Do you know Shakespeare survived the plague just by hair's breadth? Twice. Not once, twice. The village where he was born, Stratford-upon-Avon, in the parish register, you have the entry about the birth of Shakespeare. And then 2 days later, there is an entry which says that plague has come into our villages. 60% of that village was decimated. Shakespeare survived. He had so many other instances of surviving death. We know about that. But this was very interesting. It has come into our consciousness now. And Shakespeare lived during the time of the plague and he survived. He also survived when it hit London and when he was a big shot in London. Okay. Is someone talking? Yeah. So he was a big shot in London. He moved out of London just in time. And they say some of his greatest works were written during the time of the plague. If you read Shakespeare, you will understand that there are innumerable number of times when he has referred to the plague. Macbeth was written during the time of the plague. Macbeth was written during a time when James I was undergoing a lot of psychological stress. James I thought that the plague was because of all those occult practices that were part of England at that time. So the three witches basically were seen as bringers of the scourge, bringers of pestilence. And when, Shakespeare alludes to the fact that those beautiful lines when Lady Macbeth is trying to sweeten her hands with all the perfumes of Arabia, the hand washing scene. Today we can see it in a very different dimension. I'm sorry, there is a typing mistake on there. I'm so sorry. I'm very poor in all this, so I apologize. But I hope you understand the fact, or the classic statement which he makes in Romeo and Juliet, when he says, "A plague on both your houses." It was not a statement that was made offhand. It was a statement that was made from his association with the Black Death. I'm sorry, I should not be using the word here, but with plague. You can find so many such references. If you can actually do a project out of it. There's so many such references. Many of the terms that we use for the plague today were actually coined by Shakespeare. That's fantastic, right? Can we move on to the next slide? So we come to the finality. The canker, the plague, and the phage. Now, phage, I'm sure we all know the meaning. A phage is a bacteria that can be used to fight against diseases. Now, I'm trying to look at the COVID-19 situation in that sense. Can it be seen as a phage? Can something good come out of this? I know we are depressed. I know our lives have been thrown. That's just, there's a new kind of a normalcy that has come. We do not know how to react to this, how to respond to this. I know. But can we contemplate? Can we think? Is there a possibility that something good can come out of this pandemic? Many posthumanists say that, yeah, this is the natural state of process, and humanity as we know it, the idea of the Homo sapien as we know it, has come to an end. So there is this beautiful essay, treatise, that's written by two women, Sarah Lauro and Susan Embry. It's called the Zombie Manifesto. Please read it. It's a very short document. They say that, life as we know it has already come to an end. So what comes next? And they're asking us to look around and see how a post-humanist survival tactic is already being used. In the sense that we are already dead, and it's like Coleridge refers to in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. We are both living and dead. We are zombies. Lauro and Embry, they try to make us understand the zombie culture that is so prevalent today. Look around you. Everywhere there are zombies. Zombies are there in the movies. Zombies are there on a TV. Your games. Zombies are there on TV. Zombies are there everywhere. There is zombie literature everywhere. And every origin story for a zombie text, basically, is an epidemic, is a pandemic. That's how it comes, right? There is an apocalypse, the world is destroyed, and from that, it's a kind of a phoenix-like stage. Are we basically inhabiting a sphere? It's kind of thing. That's what the Zombie Manifesto talks about. And please understand, there were times in history when probably the pandemic was not considered to be only destructive. They thought that there might be something beneficial out of that also. For that, I have to refer to the White Plague. It was called the White Plague. Now, by the White Plague, what we are talking about is the epidemic of consumption that was spreading. Right? John Keats died of consumption, tuberculosis. Do you know that during the Romantic period, the consumption was considered to be a fashion? Weird, right? Humanity is weird. They thought that it actually drew artistic genius. They thought that Keats because he's consumptive, because he has so few days left to live. So people actually, they wanted that pale skin. You remember La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, where the night is pale. What ails thee? Bloodless. You can refer that back to the zombie generation also, but let's not get into that as of now. Lord Byron considered Lord Byron was considered to be very handsome, and he felt that one aspect of his handsomeness came out of his pale skin. Right? Lord Byron is the archetype for Dracula, the vampire. The vampire was based on Lord Byron, and one aspect of that was because Lord Byron had pale skin. So the White Plague was actually considered to be beneficial, and probably, for you, all you have to look at is the portrait of the painting of Ophelia, Hamlet's Ophelia. She was painted in during the pre-Raphaelite time, and the model for that, it's a very beautiful painting. You see Ophelia's dead body in the water, surrounded by lilies. It's very beautiful. It's a very effective painting, and the painting was done. The model for the painting was Elizabeth Siddal. She was consumptive. And that is exactly why the painter had her as the model, because she had the pale skin of death. As I said, people can be crazy. But coming to us, okay, fine. There are a lot of deaths. But is there another factor? Is there another way of looking at this? For example, there are a lot of memes that are coming up here today. Memes that tell you that nature is healing. I mean, the Vatican is, sorry, what am I saying? Venice is healing. I'm sorry, not Vatican. Venice is healing. Delhi is healing. The Himalayas are healing. So can we see it that way? I think it's a question for us, for introspection. Because I think during the time of containment, when we were in quarantine and when there were not a lot of vehicles on the road, the idea of carbon footprints was also lessening. We didn't exactly go carbon negative, but the amount of expulsion was actually lessening. I'm sure you're aware of that. But now, of course, it kind of makes you ask the question, have we actually learned anything out of it? I don't know. It's for us to, again, as I said, it's for us to ponder. I think I should end with this classic statement by Donna Haraway. Donna Haraway is a post-humanist who talks about the Cyborg Manifesto, one of her many tracts. Now, Donna Haraway talks about a movement, a visible movement away from Anthropocene, which should be a logical conclusion of the times like these. Because we are Anthropocene. The whole idea of how we look at the pandemic is so Anthropocene. We are focused primarily only on ourselves. And that, she says, is the problem. I mean, the way we look at the world, she says, is the problem, because Anthropocene makes us understand the world also in the sense of a plantation. There's a difference between a forest, a jungle, and a plantation. A plantation is man-made. It's consumer-oriented. It's corporate. It's labor. Remember, it was the plantations where the slaves were first introduced in. So it's very capitalist. It's the axiom of a corporate culture. And that is how we have ravished the world. Right? Anthropocene naturally leads only to the plantation scene. she wants a harking back to a world before all this, where nature was allowed. I do not know whether I can use the word allowed. Who are we to allow nature? But nature flourished. We're talking about an idea of a primeval nature before mankind actually came to the world, before the advent of us, humankind. I'm sure you must have heard a lot of references to the nature of that time, giant trees, giant animals. So we had the idea, for example, in many pagan societies, we had the idea of nature as a manifestation in itself. Gaia, for example, in Greek mythology, where nature was a manifestation in herself. In our own Indian thought, we have that a lot. So she terms it Thulusi. Now, Thulu, of course, she takes from a gigantic octopus-like monster from the H.P. Lovecraftian mythology. It's a primeval monster. It's a natural monster. So she says, are we? It's not the Holocene. I'm sure many people would try to associate that with Holocene. It's not the Holocene. It's basically an idea of nature in itself. I do not know whether we'll be able to move to that. But I just want us to understand that maybe we might not move to that, but I think we need to take steps towards a kind of an homeostasis, the word which I started with, in which we return in some way or the other, we return to the original vision of nature or the original vision of the world, not the world as we know it. Our understanding of the world is very limited. It's very selfish. But, and harking back to the times when nature was the dominant, not us. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was very interesting to discuss all these things with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for taking us on that journey and for bringing to the fore our anthropocentrism, and with this thought-provoking lecture about moving from the Anthropocene to the Plantationocene. Well, certainly this lecture made us think beyond ourselves, beyond our fear, beyond our panic, to see the larger picture and to see ourselves as part of human history, where these things have happened earlier also in human history. So I think we could take one or two questions from the audience.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You mentioned capitalism. What do you mean that this capitalistic society, which is a huge damage in the society spreading, these are all the things, and even virus or anything they create, and they want to see the destruction of the human beings. What way you have used it, sir? I thank you first, because a big thanks from me. You made me to start thinking, and very good lecture I have got today. Your comment, sir?
Are you trying to ask me the idea of the corporate virus, right? Virus, the COVID.
Yes.
Environment.
You have.
It's plain and simple out there, sir. Look at how treatments are given to people. Look at how there is so much of a poor versus rich divide. I mean, should I actually go into instances, because it's out there, it's there in the media. It is there in the way media presents these stories themselves. Yes. One of my relatives in Mumbai, they are in Mumbai, and one of them has been tested positive. She did not get an entry into any of the government hospitals because they say that they are full. So she had to be necessarily shifted to a private hospital. And though there is a kind of a, a restriction, a ceiling as to how much they have to charge, that's only in paper. In reality, the charge is so heavy. They are middle class, and now they are looking at a payment that runs into lakhs. So aren't we turning it into a corporate endeavor? Everything is being
Yes,
turned
sir.
into a corporate endeavor.
I
And
agree, sir. I
please,
agree.
again, as I say, it's not something new. Geoffrey Chaucer, when he talked about the plague in his Canterbury Tales, he also pointed out the avarice that was there in people and how they used this for, I can use this word, capital gain.
Yes, sir.
Diseases
True.
are always a part of corporate life, sir. I think it's a
Thank you.
big business.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. True.
Thank
True.
you, sir.
True.
Thank you.
One more question. With
Yes, ma'am.
we can take one more question before we wind up. So I think sir must have answered all the questions that were going through our minds.
Madam, respected madam.
Yes, sir.
You request sir to give the idea of introspection overall in a one sentence, please. I want to listen that because he started his lecture with introspection and plague, and you ask him only one or two sentences because that can be good. My request.
Yes. Okay. Sir, could you signpost your lecture in terms of the term introspection? I think with that we can call it a day.
I think it's basically about introspection, right? So I think all of the participants here have to introspect and ask the questions themselves and try to provide answers for themselves. If I do that, I'm a teacher. I don't want to be a teacher. I came here just to discuss things with you because I have been introspecting about this a lot. And some of the ideas that I put forward in my presentation today come out of those introspections. I think in the beginning of the containment period, I too underwent the same process of depression. I didn't know what to do. I was caught up at home and I was depressive, I was cranky, I was cankerous. But then reading all these things they gave me, it's not an optimism, but it's a kind of a pragmatism where I have to accept that it is part of the natural flow of humanity. Diseases are a part of life. Why do we have to be so cankers? That is the kind of introspection that I want you people to indulge in also. You have a lot of time, please do
that. I would like to make some observations.
Sure.
You spoke about AIDS and the plague in other times in history. So I was wondering whether this situation is creating another kind of untouchability, and in a wider sense, not just in the caste context, untouchability of women that has been there in our society
Yes.
all through. And we had untouchability in the context of AIDS. And I see untouchability even in the context of COVID. So the idea of, I think if you have started a thought process, as you said, you're not here to give us the answers, you are here to get us thinking. So yes, maybe we could say a few things about this if you have something to say.
I think that's an excellent way of putting it, ma'am. Because yes, there is this idea of untouchability that is so prevalent today, right? I think there was a statement by a chief minister of a particular state who said that, the whole idea of social distancing has now kind of reversed in itself, because earlier it was the poor who were considered to be kept out, and now it is the rich, because he said that the rich are the carriers of this infection. That was a statement that was made right in the beginning. I'm sure you're able to relate to the Chief Minister. I don't want to mention names here. But
You are
you are
right.
made that statement. When he made that statement, he was actually inversing the whole idea of untouchability in a sense. But you know what? I do not want to equate the problems that are faced by a section of the society with this. That would be absolutely implausible. It should not be. But the idea, as you said, absolutely true, ma'am. It's there. It's again something which has to be researched upon like this. I think basically for the students today, my discussions or whatever inputs I'm giving are for them to understand from an academic viewpoint also. Maybe they can take up projects in this because they're very fascinating. So
And
yes,
perhaps I could make this concluding remark that
yes, ma'am.
we are in a to be or not to be situation.
That's
So
true.
there are people asking, should we go to work? Is it fair for them to ask us to come to work? There are, on the other hand, first responders and doctors, nurses, people who are taking risks. There are policemen who've been working in crowded market areas. So I think each one should work out their own to be or not to be.
True, ma'am. Especially us. Especially us. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
So thank you for that wonderful, thought-provoking session, Dr. Jinnah.
Thank you
And
so much,
you're
ma'am.
always welcome to Queen Mary's College. Please come, keep coming to our
I'm
college.
already there. In a way, I'm already there. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Maria. Dr. Rufus, thank you so much for making me part of this. Thank you so much, all of you, all the participants. You are wonderful. You gave me a very patient hearing too. So I'm seriously glad that I was able to make this. And if it has been helpful for you in some way or the other, I'm thankful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye.